Okay, so thank you all for joining us for the reading and writing about academic literature, an introduction to writing a literature review workshop. Our host today or facilitator today is Dr. Amanda Hoffman, visiting assistant professor, educational psychology, leadership, and higher education. So they'll be talking about strategies for reading academic literature, including tips, suggestions, and other suggestions for mining literature for the important material. So that being said, I will go ahead and hand it over to you, Dr. Hoffman, if you want to provide more introduction and dive right in.
Awesome, thank you. So again, my name is Amanda Hoffman. I'm a visiting assistant professor in Ed Psych, and I teach mostly our intro to research methods courses and our statistics courses. And so our intro level research methods course is really focused on how to understand academic literature. And so I know that for many of you, you'll be required to either write a literature review in one of your classes, or if you are doing a thesis or dissertation, you'll be required to write a pretty detailed literature review for that final paper. And so now I thought was a great time to do this because we are getting into that time where a lot of you will be starting your final papers for the semester. And this is a really great intro to kind of find academic literature, how to read academic literature, because it is a skill that many people don't know about before they come to graduate school. It's very different than reading when you were an undergraduate. And then writing about academic literature. And so just a quick agenda. I'm going to go through a couple slides about just finding academic articles and journal articles. Then we'll get into how to read those specifically, and then what to do when you're writing a literature review. And then the last slide, I'll have some resources for you all, both on campus and online, and one book, and then we can answer any questions that you might have. So the first question is, where do you even go to find academic literature, right? In a lot of your classes, you'll be given the articles that you need to read for class, but for any final papers that you might have, or for your dissertation or thesis, you'll need to use sources outside of those from your courses. And so the first thing that you would want to look at are databases. And so databases, I personally am in the field of education, and so we use a database called ERIC a lot. UNLV has access to a number of different databases for every discipline that's on campus. So if you are in either political science or art or engineering, any of those that might have databases through the UNLV system and the UNSHE system, that you can get access to different articles that might be useful for your paper. Along with those databases, you can use the UNLV library website. And so if you are if you don't want to go directly to a specific database and you want to, if you want to more broadly look for articles, the UNLV website is a good spot for that. And we have access at UNLV to a number of different academic journals, subscriptions that you might not be able to access if you just go through something like Google Scholar. Google Scholar is a great option for looking up literature, but using the UNLV library website might give you access to a little bit more articles directly. And I'll talk about some search terms in a few minutes. And then lastly, the last thing that I put in here is using previous literature. So when you read a paper that you really enjoy and you go through and you kind of look through their either literature review or their discussion or methods, they're going to cite different sources. And so then when you go to the reference page at the end of the article, you'll be able to find similar sources that you can use in your papers. That's how I've gotten a lot of resources myself. I've taken from previous literature that was cited in papers that I've read. And so when you're looking on the either the library website or in the databases or on Google Scholar. There's some tips that you can that are here for you to search more effectively. If you just put in if I just put in education into Google Scholar or into the UNLV library website, it's going to give me millions of papers, right? And so it's not very, I can't possibly in my lifetime read a million papers. It's just not possible. And so you need to be able to narrow that down to find out the papers that are really important to your project. And so the first thing that you should do is come up with important and key words that you can use in your searches. And so personally, my substantive research is with college athletics and academic success. And so those are kind of the key words that I put into my my search when I'm looking through the library website. Or I use self-efficacy theory a lot in my work, and so I would use that specific term as a keyword. And those will be what comes up in the, if you've seen a lot of journal articles, sometimes they have the keywords of the article written right under the abstract. And so that's what they'll be looking for when the database or the library website looks through those papers for the words that you've put in there. Next is the Boolean operators. And so these are just the words that you use to connect your different key terms. And so if you've used the library website before, you can say, so again, if I was looking for myself, I would put in college athletes and self-efficacy, or college athletes and motivation, things like that, that can kind of connect. The Boolean operator says only select articles that have both college athletes and motivation, rather than just selecting everything that has either or. There is an or Boolean operator in the search, in the advanced search, and not things like that, that connect your multiple search terms. Third is quotation marks. So any words that you would like to go together specifically need to be put in quotation marks together. So like I said before, I study college athletes. And so if I just put in college athletes into the search bar, it's going to give me every article that has college, every article that has athletes, and every article that has college athletes. And so if you want only those with college athletes, you need to put those two words together in a quotation mark. And then lastly, this was a tip I actually learned when a UNLV librarian came to one of my classes, is this the asterisk. And so if you put the asterisk at the end of a word or a partial word, it will fill in every potential ending. So if you put in, I think the example that I've always used is children. If you put in child and then an asterisk after the D, it will bring you results for child, and it will bring you results for children. Any kind of ending after that, it will give you the results for. So if you're saying study, it will, if you do STUDY, it'll, and then the asterisk, it'll give you study and studying, things like that. And so the asterisk is great if you have multiple words that are pretty similar, just with different endings. And the last thing here is when you are searching, is that you can set up alerts. I know you can set up alerts in Google Scholar about whenever a new paper comes out regarding a certain topic or with a certain keyword, that Google will send you an alert that a new paper has been published or is on Google Scholar that is related to your topic. And so that's great for really keeping up with the newest literature, because you might not always know what's going to be in a the journal that you're reading, or the journals that your field uses. And then the last thing that you need to check when you are finding your academic literature is to really check the validity and the credibility of your sources. There are a lot of different journals out there, and they each have different submission requirements. They have different review processes. And so you want to make sure that you're taking from valid sources. And so one thing that you can check is a journal impact factor. And the impact factor is just how often the journal articles have been cited. I think it's over a 2-year course, but I don't know that off the top of my head. But just it's a metric that shows you how often people are using the articles from specific journals. You also kind of want to check the author credentials. And so you can look up their previous work to see if it's related to the paper that you're currently reading. You can see what institution that they're currently at. You can, there is a metric for authors called an H index about how often they are cited, things like that. And so you want to check those out before you read the whole article. And so before you even get into reading articles, you want to make sure that you're checking the source, that it is valid and credible. Now that you've found some articles, how do you go about reading them? So the first thing you want to do is decide whether the article is worth reading or not. And so there's 2 different kind of measures that I use to determine if I want to read an article or not. First is the article type. So if you are interested in finding new research ideas or seeing what is current in the field, then you might want to look at some empirical articles, right? If you're looking for a general broad overview of a topic, then you might want to look at either a meta-analysis or a systematic review, right? So different articles are useful for different types of projects. And then next, you want to see if the article is even related to your topic. I've found that some articles, and more recently, maybe this is true, sometimes use I don't want to say clickbaity, but they use an article title that's really will grab people in. But once you read the abstract, you find out that it actually isn't really related to your topic. And so you want to make sure that you are, I always tell my students, work smarter, not harder. And so you want to make sure that you are spending your time, your limited time as graduate students, reading the articles that truly are important to you and to your topic and to your field, rather than just reading articles that might not be as useful to the specific project. And so this is a helpful kind of flow chart from this 2013 piece about what article types you might want to use for the different types of projects you're doing. So like I said, ideas, if you're looking for ideas for research, you want to use original empirical articles. That includes randomized control trials or clinical trials, cohort studies, case control studies, things like that, correlational papers, anything like that would be helpful if you're looking for either to extend the research that they're currently doing or just slightly tweak it to something that is more appropriate to your field or to your personal interests. If you're interested in diagnosis or prognoses, things like that, you might want to read different case studies or case reports, textbooks about a certain area or topic that you're interested in. And like I said previously, you might want to use some of these systematic reviews or meta-analyses to get a really broad overview of what has been done in your field or in your specific setting. And so once you've chosen articles to read, it's important to understand how the article works, because like I said earlier, reading in graduate school is very different than reading in undergraduate. And so in undergraduate, you read a lot of probably textbooks and you read more front to back, right? So you read everything in the chapter. But with academic journal articles, that might not be as important here. I would recommend that you don't spend a lot of your time reading every single word of each journal article, because that might not be the best use of your time. And so the first thing I wanted to kind of break down is the anatomy of an article. And so this is really focused on more of like the social sciences and the, I guess, quote unquote, hard sciences, like a chem or bio, things like that, where your anatomy of the article starts with the title and the abstract. And the abstract is usually like 250 to 300 words that kind of summarizes the article. And so it will give you kind of a quick background of what they were doing, overview of their methods, and mainly focuses on what they found. But that will kind of give you an understanding of what the article is about. And going back to our decisions about what articles you should spend your time reading, the abstract can be really helpful for you in determining if it's worth going more into the piece. So after the abstract, you get into the introduction. And so the introduction and the literature review are usually first. Sometimes they are separate, sometimes they're together. But this is kind of just setting you up for what is happening in the article and like what's happening in the area that they're focused on in the past. So what research has already been done. Then they will get into their methods of what they're doing in the current article. Then they will post their results, whether that be statistical results or if they're doing qualitative pieces, some more thematic results. And then, so the results section is just pure results. They'll say, I did a correlation test and the correlation was significant. But in the results section, you're not getting into any kind of meaning of that result. That is all done in the discussion and or the conclusion of the piece. And so the discussion is where the authors will kind of loop their results back to the literature review. And they'll say things like, similar to this previous article, we found a relationship between these two variables. Or they might say, surprisingly, we did not find a relationship between two variables that had shown a significant correlation in earlier work. Things like that. And so you're really taking your results and situating them into the big picture of your area or your topic or your field. And then a lot of times in the conclusion or sometimes in the discussion, the authors will list areas for future research, right? So what other projects are they working on or what should be done next? So they have these results, what now? And they will also note any limitations to their study. So, they should note any limitations to this study. I'm not sure that it's in every paper, but it is something like no study is perfect. And so you want to make sure that you're listing any limitations as you are writing or reading papers. Notice the limitations. And so it is, like I said before, you shouldn't really be reading in the order of the paper that's listed here. Instead, I would say start with the abstract. Again, that kind of tells you if the paper is related to your topic enough or not to continue reading. If you read the abstract and you say, oh, this actually isn't what I'm looking for, you don't then spend your whole time reading the paper and find out on page 45 that it has nothing to do with or won't really help in your literature review. After the abstract, I would say read at least the introduction. If the introduction and literature review are together, read that whole thing. If the introduction and the literature review are separate, I would say focus on just the introduction. Then move to your discussion and conclusions. And then go back and kind of read the literature review, the method, and the results. This can be helpful, especially for those of you that are not comfortable with statistics or are math averse or statistics averse, or just kind of methodologically averse. Sometimes, especially if you haven't taken a stats class or a qualitative class, if you try to read the method section, it can be confusing and overwhelming. And then it kind of puts you in a mood that isn't very conducive for understanding the rest of the article. And so unless it is something that's really super important for you to understand, I would say read like the methods and the results last, because you're getting a lot of that information through the discussion and the conclusion, and you don't want to like immediately put yourself off from an article just because their stats or their qualitative work might be overwhelming to you. And so the reading order, like I said, is very important because you want to read effectively, not just word for word. And when you're reading these articles, it's important that you also learn how to skim articles and mine for their important parts. Because you are already reading probably over 100 pages a week for class, right? And so then you are reading outside of class as well. And so it's kind of impossible to read every word of every article. And it sometimes isn't necessary. And so you want to make sure that you're learning to skim articles in an effective way. I mean, it's still something that I struggle with. And I've been in school for forever. And I just recently graduated. But it's still something that I struggle with. So it's not something that it's going to come like right away. It's a skill that you will need to develop of skimming and making sure that you're mining the important parts. And so those important parts are probably most likely going to come from your discussion and conclusion, because again, that's where the authors are situating their work into the bigger field. And that's where you can say, oh, how can I extend this to a paper I can write, or do I want to replicate this? Things like that. And why is it important to my work? When you're reading articles, you want to make sure that you are actively reading them. You're not just kind of like reading the words, but you're actually mining them for information. And so annotating is a really big part of that. And so when you're reading articles, you should be writing in the margins or making notes on your laptop or iPad about things that come up, these questions or critiques or ideas that you might have, or just kind of putting things into words that make more sense, right? Sometimes academic articles are full of jargon and they're not very understandable. And so when you're reading them, you want to make sure you're going through and writing these notes in a way that you understand them, rather than going back and saying, just reading the jargon and not really understanding what it means. I put underlining and highlighting here. That can work. Underlining and highlighting can work as a active reading technique, but you want to make sure that you're also then connecting it to a note. Because I know that for like the first year in my doc program, I just kind of underlined sentences that were important in pieces. But then when I would go back to read them, I would have no idea why I underlined that sentence or highlighted a sentence. And so what I've come to do now is highlight things and then immediately write a note right next to them, because then I can say, oh, this is why this was so important to me, rather than just like, oh, because you're going to go back and use different papers multiple times, right? And so if you write a paper tomorrow and then you want to cite that same reference in a paper in 3 years, you're probably not going to remember what that underline or that highlight means. And so making the note within the paper is really important. And so finally, we want to talk about what it means to write a literature review, because I'm sure you will have to do it, or if you haven't already started it. And so what I like to do is this is something that I've done with my students and myself, is writing annotated bibliographies. So an annotated bibliography, if you're not familiar, the library has a great resource about annotated bibliographies, but it's really just a 2-paragraph summary and kind of evaluation of articles that you read. So the first paragraph will you write your own abstract for the paper. So you say, this was the topic that they were covering, this is how they did it, and this is what they found and why it's important. And then in the second paragraph, you want to think about how it can be useful in your paper, but also kind of think about the limitations that either the author noted or that you found were to be important. So something that I really impress upon my students in my intro to research class and generally is to evaluate samples, because a lot of times, especially in education, we take a study that maybe was done with upper middle class students in a well-funded district in the Northeast, and we try to extrapolate those results to a Title I school in rural Texas, right? And so it's important to evaluate your samples of the papers that you're reading, especially empirical papers, to make sure that the findings are relatable to your population of interest. So I know that when I was writing my dissertation proposal, I included a paper. My topic again was on college athletes, and I included a paper that evaluated elementary and middle school students. And my advisor right away said, "Why are you including this piece in your literature review if it doesn't really speak to the population that you're interested in?" And so that's something to think about when you're looking at abstracts too, of is this paper related to my population or my specific area, if you're thinking geographically as well. And then once you write those annotated bibliographies, I keep mine in an Excel spreadsheet. And so you want to find a way that works for you to organize the literature. So like I said, I use an Excel spreadsheet. It has the author names, the year it was published, the journal it was published in, the keywords, and then my annotated bibliography. And so then when I am writing a paper and I want to find all my papers about self-efficacy, I can do a filter in my Excel spreadsheet that says only bring up papers that are about self-efficacy, or only bring up papers that talk about college athletes, things like that. And so it's a great way so that you're not just like, I used to do it on note cards. I'm a writer. I like to write in notebooks and things like that. But with note cards, there's not really an easy way to find things in a way that like a digital Excel spreadsheet or Google sheet might be, right? I have to look through. I tried to keep them like alphabetized, but that didn't always work either. And so you want to make sure that you're putting them in every area that might be important. You don't want to just say an article is about college athletes, but it might be about college athletes in, let's say, social cognitive theory or self-efficacy. So that way, when you're looking for these different articles, you can find them for different reasons, right? One, I might use it in one paper about college athletes, but I might use it in another one because of its theoretical design. So when you're writing literature reviews, this is kind of like the first step, and this goes back to the annotated bibliography part. You want to evaluate the pieces that you're using. And so whether it doesn't use a good theory, but it has a bad sample, things like that, and make sure you're noting that when you're evaluating them. Paraphrasing is really important. In your literature review or any piece that you're writing, you want to limit the amount of direct quotes that you're taking from papers. I think I've seen somewhere a colleague on Twitter said that he limits students to one direct quote per page. You want to limit that amount that you're directly quoting, and instead take the ideas and put them into your own words. And because that will help you to kind of synthesize the literature. And one thing that has really helped me is outlining literature reviews, because there will be a lot of things to include, right? So I think my dissertation, I used probably over 150 articles or books or things like that. And so if you try to organize those 150 pieces without outlines, it can get really jumbled. And so you want to make sure that you're finding some kind of organization method that works for you. I like outlining. I know other people that like working with like mind maps. So more visual representation of like this article goes here and this article goes here and how they connect, things like that. And so any kind of organization system that works for you is really important, because outlining might not work for you. And I'm, again, work smarter, not harder, and find something that will make you most successful. Lastly, what is a literature review? And so this is something that I've had to cover in my class before, is that a literature review is not just a book report of the articles that you have read. Instead, what a lit review should be is a synthesis of the literature. So it shouldn't, your literature review should not be article 1 in their title talked about self-efficacy theory, and in college students, they used a sample of 500 students and they did this kind of analysis and they found this. That's more book report style. What the literature review would say is that previous research found that college students built self-efficacy through so-and-so, and then cite the different sources that told you that. And so you're writing broadly about the topic rather than saying article 1 said this, article 2 said this, article 3 said this. You want to bring those articles together and see how they are aligned or how they're different and talk about that. So the literature review is more telling the story of the research rather than directly quoting from the research. It's important too. I know that academic dishonesty is something that's really important to me. And so I just really love school a lot, and I want to make sure that people are doing this the right way. And so citations are really important because you want to avoid plagiarism. And so anytime that you use an idea from a piece or an article, that you should be citing that, whether you directly quote it or if you're just paraphrasing it or combining it in a sentence, because you need to be crediting, I don't know if I said that correctly, the people who did the work, right? Like if it's not your idea, you want to make sure that you are giving the dues to the people who actually did the work. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of writing literature reviews is getting feedback. You will never write a perfect literature review on the first try. I remember in my first semester of graduate school, I wrote a lit review for a grant proposal, like an on-campus grant, and I sent it to my supervisor and it came back all read. Like I would say 3 sentences were not read. And so it's going to sting that first time you write a lit review. It's not something that we are kind of taught how to do, right? You come into graduate school, they say write a lit review, but nobody says, how do I do that? And so you want to get feedback, whether that be from your professors or from peers or from supervisors, advisors, things like that, or the writing center. And so I'll talk a little bit about the writing center next, because there are a lot of good resources for you all on campus and online that you can use to get started in these kind of papers. So the first thing is the UNLV library. I went to LEAD for the first time in person on Friday and I loved it, and I might go back. I might go back every day. And so this is the library website. But within the library, there are subject specific librarians who have a really good bank of information about your specific topics. So they'll be able to guide you to what databases to use, and they'll be able to guide you to the journals that you might should be interested in. And so they can be really, really a great resource for you on campus. But the library also provides a lot of workshops and tutorials on how to do research, how to find articles, how to read articles, how to write literature reviews. There's a lot of whether they're video tutorials or in-person workshops or kind of worksheets that kind of guide you through that information. That's a really important resource. The Purdue OWL is the online writing center from the Purdue University, and it is really has a lot of great resources for citations. And so I use it all the time because when APA, I've been writing an APA for 10 years and I still miss little things. And so you want to make sure that when you are citing or if you're looking for APA formatting or whatever formatting you use in your field, the Purdue OWL is really great for that. For those of you that didn't know, the Writing Center is available for all students on campus, including graduate students. And so I didn't know that this was a thing when I went to the University of Missouri, and I didn't know that I could use the Writing Center until probably my 3rd year there. And so I was just kind of struggling through to write my papers. And the Writing Center can really be helpful to provide some of that feedback and evaluation, because you can write your paper and read it back and it sounds great, but somebody else reading it might catch the things that you are overlooking. And so they're not going to like check your commas and things like that, but they will help you broadly with topics. And if the organization of your paper is a little off, you want to make use of any of those resources that you can. And then the last resource that I want to leave you all with is this book called They Say, I Say, and it's by Graff and Birkenstein. It's a great book that talks about how to write academic article, or not write academic articles per se, but just write academically. So scholarly writing. And I think the ebook is only $21 and the paperback book is $30. And so it's not super expensive, but it's a really great way to kind of understand how to read and interpret articles and then put those words into your own words. And so, does anyone have any questions?
And feel free to type any questions in the chat as well if you'd like.
Thank you very much. This was very interesting. I really appreciate it. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. Is it important to use something like RefWorks? I'm more like you. I love my Excel and I then transfer it, but what about using a platform like RefWorks? How have you found that to work versus Excel?
I use, what is it called? Zotero, something like that, like a reference manager, can be really helpful because it then you don't have to write all your references out by hand each time you write a paper. You can just they do your in-person or your parenthetical citations and your reference list. So you can use whatever works, I think, for you. I like the Excel because I can organize it. Maybe I just haven't done enough work with Zotero about how I can organize it into searchable things rather than just in the different folders. It might be something that I have to explore a little bit more with the reference managers.
Yeah, when I find something, I just put it into Google Scholar, and then that gives me the APA reference. And of course, it's not always right, but then I just copy and paste that into the reference section, and then use it for the citations. But if I also put that into Excel too, which and then sometimes I just write the whole abstract. I copy the whole abstract, and other times I'll do conclusion, design, whatever it is that I'm working on. I'm about to start my dissertation, so I'm trying to get as organized as I possibly can and as efficient.
Yes, because you are going to use a lot of sources, and so you want to make sure that you can find the one that you need. Because I'm also like, I like to print out my articles and read them and highlight on like with my hand. And my advisor was like, you need to stop doing that because it's not going to be an efficient way to find information when you need it.
Right, especially with 150 articles that you had.
Yeah.
So when I click on the library link, it takes me to a home page that I always use, but it's not PubMed or anything like that. I just use that home page. And I was wondering what the advantages or disadvantages of going to another home. Yeah, that exact one that's coming up there now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just put in whatever I want there. Is there an advantage or disadvantage of doing that comparing to finding a database, for example, PubMed, and then searching on that database?
I would say that the advantage to using the library website is that you will have access to all of the different fields, whereas the databases sometimes limit you to, so like if I use Eric, it will limit me to those education pieces. But if I want to find something in like sociology or criminal justice, it might not be in the Eric database. And so the library website will give you access to like all of the different journal subscriptions we have. And so you can more broadly search for the terms that you're interested in and find maybe outside of your field.
So when people say in an article that they've gone to certain databases, they've searched Scopus or PubMed or whatever it is, how do you then reference this page right here? Do you understand my question?
Yeah, that might be a question. That might be a question for the librarians.
Okay.
Because I'm not really sure.
Okay.
It might be as simple as saying like we searched our institution's library.
Okay. Great. All right. Thank you very much. And did you have contact information on your phone?
Yeah, it's just my name, amanda.hoffman@unlv.edu.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Hoffman. I do have a question about the method part of the paper, because I just started reading those research papers, and there's a lot of technical terms and models I don't really understand and didn't know how to interpret. So I was wondering, when we like writing the literature review, should we like include those methods if we don't understand?
I wouldn't include the method of a study unless it was like important, I guess, because I would focus more on the results of the study in your literature review than the methods of the studies. Unless you are speaking directly to why that, like, if it was, so I use a specific modeling type. It's called log linear Bradley Terry modeling. So it's like not very popular. It's not very used. And so if I found a paper that had used that specific type of modeling, I might include that. But if I'm using something that has a more common method type, I wouldn't include the method. You would just need to understand how the method is related to their findings. And so like, and they'll explain that in the discussion of like, if it's correlations, they'll talk about relationships. If it's regressions, they'll talk about predictions. If it's qualitative, they'll talk about like the different themes and codings, things like that. And so those are more commonly known, and I don't think you would need to mention them specifically within your literature review.
Oh, okay. Thank you. But when we just read the research paper, because I've met a lot of like math problems in the method, is that something like we will learn like generally, not the
Yes. Yeah.
It's so confusing sometimes.
Yes. Stats can be overwhelming. As somebody who teaches stats, I know that most people only take my class because it's a requirement. And so it can be scary and intimidating. That's why I would say to wait to read the method until after you read the discussion, because those math problems can kind of put people off from, like, they're just like, I don't know what this is saying, so I'm not going to read any more of it.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And we do have a Q&A question as well here from Yasmin. Can you walk us through your process of reading and updating your lit review outline and updating your spreadsheet? I'm trying to visualize how someone can manage over 100 references.
It's not easy. You see, this is the thing. When you're like a first year student, you're like, oh, I can never read 150 articles. And then it just kind of like all flows. And so what I do in terms of updating my outline, that one I'll do per when I start the paper, when I start different papers, I'll update the outline for each paper that I'm writing. When I was doing my dissertation, it was kind of just like an ongoing document that I had started kind of like, I guess, the end of my third year. And the Excel, I kind of just keep adding things to the bottom, and then I can either sort by the keyword or by the topic or by the authors. So I know certain authors talk about, like, Bandura is the self-efficacy person, right? So I can filter by that. And so I just keep adding to the end of the list so that it is just like a running document. And then it's good also because you can then share it with other people if you needed to. You could just pull from it pretty quickly versus I don't know how some professors can just like say, oh, that was from a 2002 piece by Wagner or whoever, and like they talked about this. Like, that will never be my brain. And so I need to put it in like in a spreadsheet or that outline, so I can say, like, I want to talk about self-efficacy in this section and say, oh, these are the pieces that I want to include. And not every piece that you read has to go in your literature review. That's a big thing that I should have said before too, is that not every piece will fit into every literature review. You want to make sure that you're picking and choosing the articles that are really, truly important to the paper rather than just like loading the reference list. Oh, and these are just the links I have up here for the library, the Purdue OWL, the Writing Center, and the They Say, I Say book. And then there's a new They Say, I Say book coming out in spring 2024. I think the next edition is coming out in spring 2024.
All right, last call for any questions for Dr. Hoffman. Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you, of course, to Dr. Hoffman for sharing your expertise with us. I dropped the workshop survey feedback link into the chat here. If you could take a few minutes to fill out the survey, and that really helps us inform future content and workshops we'll plan for in the spring and into next year. So thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. It was really great.
Thank you all for coming.